Oh, hello, friend. Come, join us by the fire. The story's about to begin. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the fire. It's just me today, but I'm glad you still decided to stop by. As I'm sure many of you have probably noticed at this point, there's a bit of a gap in between episodes of the main story of Fireside Dice. This is due to just like the everyday demands of life and how little time I have as the editor to actually sit down and spend 3 hours to edit out each episode. And so it takes a little bit of time. I had to push back to monthly releases, but that leaves this gap that I mentioned earlier, and I wanted to fill this gap with something. So I've been thinking and contemplating what kind of content could I be producing to give you guys a little bit more to listen to, a little more insight. And I realized these gaps are a perfect opportunity for me to sit down and explain some of the terms, places, and people that are Magic the Gathering specific that come up in our campaign that aren't widely known. So what I'm going to start doing, the second Friday of every month, I'm going to produce one of these 15 to 30 minute episodes where I discuss and explain some aspect of Magic the Gathering that may pertain to either the episode that's coming up that month or previous episodes that I just haven't touched on yet, to kind of help give everyone a little better sense about what's going on and to feel a little more connected to the story and the setting that our campaign has taken place in. And our show, like the main story segments of our show, will continue to be uploaded and released on the final Friday of every month. Today, I want to start by discussing the Plane of Ravnica. Now, Jen's mentioned in some of the earlier episodes that you've already listened to that Magic the Gathering as a setting is broken up into multiple worlds of existence called planes. Each world is different, it has a different feel, it presents different opportunities for storytelling. And Ravnica is the plane of existence that our campaign has so far been taking place on. Ravnica consists of one large city that covers the entire world. For those of you who are familiar with Star Wars, it's like Coruscant, but in a fantasy setting. If you're not familiar with Star Wars, picture New York City and imagine if all of the planet Earth was New York City. Like every square inch of this planet was New York City. One of the primary things, other than the fact that it's the whole plane of existence is one massive city, one of the things that makes Ravnica unique is the governing body of Ravnica. Ravnica is ruled by 10 different guilds, and all political and municipal power is split amongst all of them. They each have a different thing that they're in charge of, and they all have different philosophies and ways of viewing the world that kind of tailor into what their responsibilities are and what they end up doing each day. Now, each guild is very complex. There's a lot of nuance, so I can't, in 15 to 30 minutes, I can't discuss everything for each of the guilds. So today what I want to do is just tell you what each guild is responsible for in running the city and a little bit of background as to really anything I feel like is important for you to understand at this moment for the campaign as it is. And maybe in the future, another episode of this explanation series we've got started, I might sit down and talk about one or two guilds in depth for an episode, but we'll see where we go for there. To start, we're going to start with the Azorius Senate. Now this guild has been mentioned, I think, a couple of times so far in the campaign. They are made up of law mages and enforcers, and they're in charge of writing and enforcing all of the laws that govern the general populace of Ravnica. The membership of the guilds only makes up about a third of the population of the city. And so there's plenty of guild lists that still need to be monitored and still need to be controlled. And so the Azorius are the ones in charge of creating those laws that this guild list and like individual guild members have to abide by. And they're kind of the police force, all that. Next, we have the Boros Legion. Now they're a guild that our players interacted with very directly in, I think it was episode 2, when we were getting more information. The Boros are similar to the Azorius in that they're enforcers of a kind, but they're more of the military might of Ravnica. Very regimented, very strict. The Azorius and the Boros both seek peace in the city and order, but they go about it in different ways, where the Azorius are all about laws and governance. The Boros Legion tend to use more direct methods of enforcement to make sure that the peace is maintained. House Dimir is a very important guild that's going to come up in the campaign later. Not to give too many spoilers, but they're very important. And they're somewhat of a mystery to the people of Ravnica. Little is really known about the guild, but there's a lot of rumors about what the guild is, if they're even real, all of that. On the outside, those people that know of the Dimir, they know them as letter carriers, like the mail system. But as you go deeper into the guild, you find yourself amongst spies, assassins, informants, and information gatherers. Information is their whole thing, because knowledge is power. When I think of the Dimir, I like to imagine, like, they're kind of the Illuminati of Ravnica, if that helps. Moving on from House Dimir, we're going to delve underneath the city itself to meet the Golgari Swarm. These under-citizens are in charge of agriculture and sewage maintenance. And on top of, like, growing crops and producing a lot of food for the citizens of Ravnica, they're also responsible for processing the dead of the city. Bodies on Ravnica are taken to the Golgari Swarm, unless there's some other thing, like if it's a rich man that has a mausoleum, whatever. Your average citizen, when they die, is going to be delivered to the Golgari Swarm, where the Golgari use a lot of nature magic and rot-based magic to utilize the remains of these bodies to benefit nature and reintegrate the body into the ecosystem of the plane of existence. Returning to the surface, we find ourselves in a section of the city that has been destroyed. This is the home of the Gruul clans. That's a really hard word for me to say, apparently. These wild people despise civilization. They want nothing more than to raze the city to the ground, which is a really interesting concept when you think about it. Unsurprisingly, the thing that they're responsible for in the city is demolition. If there's ever a building that needs to be torn down to make way for a new building or whatever, the Gruul are commissioned to come in and take care of that. When they're not doing that, they're out in a section of Ravnica called the Rubble Belt, where they've just smashed the city down, and the wilds, like trees and forests, are starting to overtake the Rubble Belt to return Ravnica to that wild state that they crave. As we move back to the city, leaving the Rubble Belt, we're going to run into the technological prowess of Ravnica, the Izzet League. This guild is full of genius inventors that their responsibility is research and development for the city. They are in charge of developing new technologies, things to improve life on Ravnica. But they also work in conjunction with the Golgari, running the city's waterworks, the plumbing. To kind of give you a visual identity for the Izzet, they kind of bring a steampunk flair to the city. You've got this fantasy city that has all of these like technological marvels. Like they have various kinds of weapons. They've got automatons, a bunch of different things. They are obsessed with developing new technologies. Moving on, the Orzhov Syndicate is next, and they're kind of an unusual guild. They are responsible for both the central religion of Ravnica, as well as the banking system. I am sure you can imagine religion and banking, what kind of a group or organization would come out of those two being together. The Orzhov are a very greedy and corrupt guild. They're led by an immortal ghost council called the Obzedat. And for the Orzhov, everything is a deal. Contracts are huge for them, and everything has a price. They're always out to increase their own, not really their own individual. The Orzhov, members of the Orzhov are always out to increase the power of the Orzhov themselves. While we're on the topic of interesting guilds, let's move on to the Cult of Rakdos. Now, we've mentioned them a couple of times so far in the podcast. This guild, they're all about self-pleasure is the best way I can think of to put it. Officially, they're responsible for entertainment in Ravnica, putting on shows and carnivals and circuses, that kind of thing. But their interpretation of entertainment can sometimes be a bit wild and a bit unorthodox. Every vice that you could possibly think of is somehow catered to by someone in the Rakdos. So they're very self-indulgent people. Now, moving on from that mess, let's move on to a more pleasant guild, and actually one of my personal favorites, the Selesnia Conclave. The Selesnia are a very religious guild, but not the same religion as the Orzhov. Their religion, they believe primarily in the principles of community and balance and a strong connection with nature. For the city, they are gardeners and landscapers. They're in charge of beautifying the city, more or less. But they do a lot more. I'll have to sit down and write out an episode of this specifically for them, because they do a lot, and there's a lot to them. They also have a military, but the military isn't their whole thing like it is for the Boros. And they're also very much into history, like learning, like maintaining and learning and protecting the history of Ravnica. And now the last guild is the Simic Combine. They're in charge of the hospital system and medical staff of Ravnica. If you get hurt and you're taken to a hospital, it's going to be the Simic who are operating on you and taking care of you. Their guild is made up of medical professionals and biomancers, and they're very interesting because not only do they take care of biological needs of the people, they are also very interested in modifying themselves to become the most perfect biological being they possibly can. So they take a lot of inspiration from nature, trying to splice in genetics from other animals to themselves to give them like gills or wings or a bunch of that kind of stuff to try and create the perfect being. Now that's the 10 guilds in a nutshell. But what is it that keeps these 10 guilds in check? When you have that many organizations with absolute power, they don't just coexist. Something's got to be keeping them from going all-out war with each other. And that's where the Guild Pact comes in. You've heard the Guild Pact before if you've listened to any of our episodes, that term. But to give you a little more background, the Guild Pact was originally a binding spell that both organized the guilds and kept them under control. After a series of events a few years prior to our campaign, the Guild Pact spell was shattered, basically making it impossible for the guilds to go to war. And they almost did, or maybe they did, I can't remember exactly. But the spell was recreated within a powerful mage and planeswalker named Jace Beleren. Now that Jace is the living Guild Pact, whatever he says is law, and the guilds have to obey. Of course, the magic of the Guild Pact only controls the guilds as broad entities, keeping them in check on their own, but the individuals within the guilds are still able to act on their own accord and to do whatever they want, and if they do anything that breaks any laws, they fall under the jurisdiction of the Azorius. Well, that's as much as I think we have time for today. I hope that I've given you a better idea of what Ravnica is and some of the guilds specifically that we run into in our campaign. We've talked about and ran into a couple so far, but who knows what other ones we're going to interact with. What guild do you think we're going to run into next? Go ahead and drop a comment over on our YouTube channel for this video and let us know. We'll see if you're correct. Also, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop those in the comments below, or there's a wonderful channel called The Librarians that I'll include a link to a couple videos of theirs where they break down Ravnica according to its history and lore, and they go a little more deeply into that philosophy. So if you're interested to learn more about Ravnica, that is a great resource for you to check out. But in the meantime, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the month, and look forward to the next episode coming up very soon. And with that, I will bid you adieu. Bye! Thank you all for joining us in this episode of Fireside Dice. This podcast is produced by Realms of Roleplaying, and all music used in this program was produced by Alexander Nakarada of Serpent Sound Studios. We'll see you all in the next episode.